Hi, welcome everyone to this week's Office Shock Talk on the spectrum of place and time. My name is Joseph Press, one of the co-authors of Office Shock, and I'm very excited to have Jill Parker, the CEO of BDG Architecture, with us today. And we are going to be exploring this spectrum of place and time. Jill, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Delighted to be joining you this afternoon.
Fabulous. So we have been conducting these Office Shock talks since the launch of the book, and we've had the opportunity to explore with experts like yourself and contributors to the book on the topics of purpose. We are going to be speaking also about outcomes. At the end of the month, next week, we're going to be speaking about belonging. And we're really excited because everyone is talking about place and time. Everyone is talking about, do I go to the office 3 days a week or 2 days a week? And clearly, in this post pandemic world or inter-pandemic world, because there will be some kind of a pandemic emerging from somewhere, there will always be other shocks happening. Office shock is not just about the workplace, but it's about the impacts of climate. It's about the changes that we're seeing in social equality. It's also the technologies that are having an impact. And we're going to be covering all of these topics over the next couple of weeks. So when we talk about the workplace, in our chapter of the book on spectrum and place, we refer to a concept of the office verse. And the office verse is a framework to describe all of the different places and different times we may be working. And so I'd love to hear, Jill, from your perspectives as CEO of a global architecture firm focusing on the workplace. How are you seeing these archipelagos of different places and times to work and how that's influencing the workplace as a whole?
Okay. The workplace as a whole has changed. It changed very quickly in a short space of time over the pandemic. And what Officeverse really is, I think, is about choice, isn't it? And that's what people are now realizing, that, everybody has choices to where to work. It's no longer just about the office space. And one of the things that, everybody seems to be talking about at the moment is is it 3 days a week in the office? Is it 4 days a week in the office? But actually, it's way more complex than that. It's kind of going right back to, well, why are you in the office? Why aren't you working at home, or why aren't you in a shared place? Is the office the right place for you today, rather than it's been mandated that you're in 3 days a week? So I think, one of the biggest changes has been empowering people to make those choices. But also technology comes into that as well. And technology is a great enabler, but it's also a limiter if it doesn't work.
Indeed. And you mentioned technology, and I'm curious to get your perspectives on. We were clearly inspired by the metaverse when we came up with this notion of the office first to really encapsulate the kind of flexibility that you're describing. How are you seeing technology changing the conversation about the workplace?
Technology, I say, is the fantastic enabler, and the metaverse is out there. It's very early days, I think. What we're seeing is everybody's interested in it, how it's going to work, but it still has quite a way to go. I think one of the biggest challenges that we're seeing immediately is about what we're calling, how do you achieve the seamless integration? So if people are together in a room and others are dialing in, or, how do you make that a better experience for everybody? Because ultimately, perhaps we will all meet in the metaverse, but at this point in time, it's not there yet. And I think you referred yesterday to an article about what's happening with Accenture and how they've tried it. It's exciting. It's just got to speed up.
It's got to speed up and maybe get a little bit stable. Indeed, that article that you're referring to was just published a couple of weeks ago in Slate, and talking about the experiment of Accenture in one of their country offices, where they handed out Oculus Rift headsets just to see if staff was going to actually be able to work in a virtual environment. And you are right, based on what the feedback was, that we're still a bit off being able to feel completely comfortable in a virtual environment for an extended period of time.
But I think it's definitely going to happen. I think perhaps our generation are more challenged by it than the younger generations. It's an extension of the gaming. They're all very comfortable with headsets and being on it for hours, and that is the future for work. Not exclusively, though. I think there'll always be, as you say in Officeverse, this element of choice of coming together when you want to, but being able to communicate just as easily anytime, any place, regardless of time zones.
Right. And I think that point that you had mentioned, the importance of being able to make choices. I'm really curious to hear a little bit more about what you're seeing on the technology side. Specifically, I recall, as a disciple of Frank Duffy, one of the workplace pioneers a number of years ago when I was back practicing architecture, he referred to a concept called networked offices. We referred to that in the book, the beginning of the book, when we look back 50 years, actually more like 100 years, of how the workplace has evolved over time, and the inflection points, specifically around technology, but also social technologies like organizational structures, bureaucracies, processes, as a big influencer on the workplace design. What are you seeing today as some signals of this concept of a networked office, or what we're calling in the book the Officeverse?
I think that, the signals are there that, this is the future and that it's what the expectations are. If you look at how, say, the university learning is happening now, just as remotely as lectures are there, but then also you can zoom into them, you can listen to them in your own time frame, you can do it later. And I think that's the sort of the signal that this is what's going to happen going forward. It's people will meet or they won't meet. They'll meet in the metaverse or they'll meet together. So, that then in turn throws a question mark about officers and then what they have to achieve and deliver. And what we're seeing already is kind of much more leaning towards officers being better quality, more about collaboration, more about hospitality as well.
Interesting. Are there any examples of some of the clients that you're currently in conversations with, perhaps in the schematic design phases or elsewhere in the design process, that you feel are beginning to take some of those signals and incorporate them into the choices that they're making about their workplace?
Yeah, I think that certainly in terms of the design, there's a lot of talk about office space now being much more collaborative. It's certainly about less desks, but it's also about creating very focused spaces as well. It isn't just, come in for the social get-togethers. It's like, well, I'm in because I want to see people, but at some stage during the day, I'm going to have to join a call. I need focused space. I need quiet space as well. But people are taking less space, but better quality space. But I think one of the things that isn't yet being realized is the fact that having everybody in at the same time isn't the answer either. Don't, it's not about dating days in the office. It's about allowing people to choose what's best. Otherwise, we're not going to make the savings in real estate. We're not going to, we're going to have an office space that is empty either end of the week, and that's not sustainable either.
Mm-hmm. And I guess it's going to be empty because there hasn't been enough engagement of staff to be able to contribute to some of those workplace policy decisions. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think that it's, people are beginning to engage more with their staff, but there's the struggle of the management about we want everybody in, and the employees who would like to choose to come in slightly less than 5 days. So, what we're seeing currently is that it's sort of very concentrated time in the office. But actually, I think in the future, it will, as Office First becomes more understood, it will spread.
What are some of the arguments that you're hearing for being in the office or that end of the spectrum of office buildings? And what are some of the arguments that you're hearing for being on the opposite end, which is more in that office first?
I think the arguments about being in relate to I want to see my people. We work better together. And some of that is just, shall we say, we're not experienced enough yet in Office First. Do we quite trust it enough that the technology will support going forwards? And the arguments for being out is, well, that varies considerably. We do a lot of engagement with employees on behalf of our clients, and very often it's the technology isn't, it's better at home. I can concentrate more at home. It suits me to be at home. And I think, the next question is, well, why does that always have to be Mondays and Fridays?
Mm-hmm.
And I think if you actually ask the employees, it doesn't have to be. But it's that thing against the management who want people in together.
And is there an explicit or implicit point from management about control or productivity, efficiency? Are any of those terms being used to justify the workplace policy leaning more heavily on being in the actual same physical environment?
Yeah, I think productivity is yet, I think time will tell on the productivity side of it. Individuals certainly reported feeling more productive at home. And I think that it's true on an individual basis, but the question is really, what are we missing in the collective when we're together? And I think that the Office First is about recognizing that you can still work together, but from different locations, and that the office isn't the answer to everything.
And I think having a clear sense of what is the shared purpose, is there alignment on outcomes, and is there clarity on the impact of what we refer to as officing? All of those can help make it clear that it is, as you pointed out, not a given that if you're together, you are achieving those objectives, and certainly not necessarily being more productive.
Yeah. So, and I think that one of the big challenges that organizations face through Office First and not being together is how you create that sense of belonging and that culture that we still have the same goals, we just maybe don't come together from 9 till 5 every day. We're doing it on a different level.
Well, this is my opportunity to plug the conversation that we'll be having next week with Ibrahim Jackson on the spectrum of belonging. So putting that plug aside, I'd like to go back to, you're raising such an important point, being able to bring people together, to have that sense of belonging. You had mentioned earlier that you're working with more staff in a more direct way to help shape the design of the office. So number one, I'd be curious to hear, what are some of the ways that you're doing that you're engaging with staff to make them be a part of the design process? And then I'd also love to hear if you're also including them in some of those more workplace policy decisions based on technology, and helping to get a clearer sense of what's the right balance between in-person and the home office.
Mm-hmm. I think the first thing to say is that, the outcome is, and the balance is different for each organization. Mm-hmm. And it's also different for different roles within the organizations. Or, this isn't, let's say Tuesday, Thursday doesn't fit everybody, and we need to recognize that. And how we engage through primarily through workshops, in person, but also virtually as well. Oh. And that's something that, the pandemic brought forward. We learned a lot about that, and actually engaging virtually, you can get a far greater reach with that, and you see very different outcomes from it. And, people do want to say, and they are very engaged in it. And I think you don't engage at your peril going forward. The age of being able to dictate to employees has definitely passed us now. And in the future, people will choose. They will have they've got a voice now. I think it's one of the unintended consequences of the pandemic that actually the employee gained a lot of sway in the arguments about it. And not that it's always an argument, I should say, but that's not going to change. You can't take that back from the employees now. So you have to listen to their voices, what works for them as individuals, but they also have an opinion about what works for their team. And it's understanding that balance between what the individual wants, what the team wants, and what the business needs, and aligning those.
I'm curious, how is leadership feeling about what sounds like some rebalancing in that spectrum, not just about office buildings and office spurs, but a bit of the rebalancing in the individual purpose and collective purpose, and the ability to influence bottom up versus top down?
Yeah. I think the great thing about engaging with people, with the staff, is that actually we're working with organizations who are realizing, if you like, the gap between the direction they want to go in and where people are today, and how you bring them on that journey is sort of crucial to how Office First will work for them. Mm-hmm. And I'd say that it varies between style of management as to how easy that journey is. As opposed to those who kind of, dictatorships don't exist anymore, or can't, or won't survive, shall we say, in terms of the management styles. And what we're seeing is a much more collaborative way forward, and people choosing to work for organizations because actually the Office First that's available to them, the options of where to work and when to work, are drawing people to those companies.
And as you were describing that, Jill, I had a trigger leading us to the spectrum of agility. And the spectrum of agility is a stable structure. And the best example of a stable structure that maps quite nicely to the office building is an organizational hierarchy. And then on the other end of our agility spectrum is what my co-author Bob Johansen refers to as shape-shifting organizations, which are much more agile, much more project-based. In your conversations with both leaders and the teams that they are managing, does that topic of hierarchy come up in the conversations related to the workplace?
Yes, it does. And I think that, hierarchy is, shall we say, the differences between hierarchy are changing. Everybody has the same access now to how they work. And I think that we're not seeing so much kind of aloofness from leadership. It is much more integrated and part of the solution rather than just, we do it this way, get on with it.
And in your experience, is that an incremental shift or a transformational shift?
I think that it was evolving slowly before the pandemic, and now I'd say it's transformational. It happened sort of quickly, and it is transforming how companies are working.
So in a similar spirit, if you're hearing about questions and attempts to try to augment or amplify that rebalancing between stable structures and shape-shifting structures, that kind of bottom-up, top-down way of operating, are you also hearing the questions that I believe you mentioned at the beginning of our conversation about why are we working together? What is our collective purpose? What is the shared outcomes that we're aiming to accomplish by working together? Are those also coming up in the conversations?
Yeah, very much so. And I think, one of the examples I'd use is that of how things are changing is that one of our clients that we're working with is actually a call center. And call centers very typically have always been very regimented, very hierarchical, planned in very similar ways. And actually, we've engaged with the workforce there. We've listened to what they want and how they see their space and what they need from the building. And, also the ability then to work from home, and that's actually producing what we think is the call center of the future coming out of it. It's very early days yet, but it's very inclusive and it's very bottom up rather than top down.
And it also reminds me of a project that your colleague, Colin McCready, shared when we were writing the book about choices at a headquarters in London. And as part of that headquarters, there was actually innovation spaces that were carved out of the site to be able to provide the entrepreneurs and startups from the community to actually have a place to be able to grow their businesses.
Yeah. It's about being inclusive. And one of the things that I think we have to have a responsibility for is making sure that everybody can come on this journey towards Office First with us. And, that's access to technology, it's access to people, it's access to help. And, certainly the building that we're referring to, they created a space where entrepreneurs could come in and benefit from the existing structures that were there. And it was a win-win on both sides. The organization got the benefit of seeing meeting new startup businesses, and the startup businesses were getting benefit from an established business and looking for ways to work together and learn from each other.
So we've got a question, actually, it's related to that. And particularly you said win-win, Jill. The question is, and I'm going to add a bit to the question, is design becoming or being influenced by the opportunity to develop a collaborative culture where both employer and employee win?
Very much so. I think collaboration is the key to the future, and employees and employers working together is very much it's a mutual benefit to both.
Mm-hmm.
It's breaking down the hierarchy or the very obvious signs of hierarchy.
And it's frankly music to my ears as a former architect. About 20 years ago, my last project was the headquarters of AOL Time Warner in Paris, and it was all about hierarchy. At the time, AOL was on top, both financially, literally financially, but then also metaphorically. And there was a big debate whether the CEO of AOL France would have not just the top floor, but the largest office in comparison to the CEO of Warner Brothers France. And because of the history of Warner Brothers, and particularly in France, that was a bit of a clash of egos. Are you still seeing signs of that culture and ego clash, or is that also a sign of the times?
I would say that right up until the day of lockdown, the very first day of lockdown, we were still having many discussions with organizations about, do you really need an office? Do you really need an office to prove that you're that level? Isn't it better to be more open, collaborative, working alongside people? That argument has been wiped out almost now. Suddenly everybody gets it. They don't need an office because actually they've been managing people remotely, and in many ways they've got better conversations going from it. So officers or individual officers are kind of very much old news.
So I'm also curious to hear, with all of the changes on the client side, how has Office Shock, in all of its nuances and all of the shocks that have been happening, how has that influenced designers? And particularly, how have designers had to adjust or to grow capabilities in order to be able to interact with clients in a manner that, I'm just building on that question, in a manner that helps them develop this collaborative culture, or to amplify that collaborative culture?
I think probably the best way of describing it is that we're not workplace designers anymore. We don't design buildings. We actually go right back to the very beginning and talk about all of the elements, all of the things in the spectrum. You've got to understand all of those about the purpose, the outcomes, sustainability. We've got a responsibility to look at it holistically before the architecture begins. What's the purpose of this building? What's the experience we want to create for people? What's happening with climate change? What's happening about sustainability? What positive impact can we make? And then we start designing. Once you understand all of those things in the spectrum, then it comes together.
Well, that's very interesting. I'm curious to hear, are clients becoming more savvy in expecting from the workplace designers to be able to have those broader, more holistic conversations across, basically, as you just described, Jill, across all 7 spectrums of Office Shock?
Yes, I'd say most definitely. If you think about a CEO of an organization, those are the issues that they're grappling with. And it goes back right down to, well, why have we got an office? Why are we doing this? Do we need it? Should we have it? Do our people want it? How often do they want it? And is it sustainable? Can we create a sense of belonging that will draw people into the space? And so those are very much the fundamental questions that we begin with before we start.
So I'm curious if you have some recommendations for people within organizations or on the outside that are looking to turn office shock, specifically that initial shock of the workplace, into a great opportunity to address the other spectrums.
I think it's about listening to your people, asking them what works for them, thinking about where you want to be in the future. It's not just about what's happening today. It's where's your vision? What do you think the future looks like? What part do you want your organization to play in that future? And then design towards that. At the moment, we're still dealing with the aftershock of the pandemic, and it's still happening, and nobody knows. And it's very much about what's right for your organization, but it is absolutely about where you want to go.
Right. And we didn't rehearse this, Joe, but it's, again, wonderful to hear the importance of what we refer to in the book as future back thinking. As you said, what is that future? In that future, what are going to be the experiences that the products, the services within organizations, what will be the rituals? How and when will people interact and why will they interact? What are the experiences of that future? And then that informs, well, what are the choices that we want to make now to use the design of the workplace as an opportunity to pivot the organization or to accelerate the organization's journey towards more belonging, more prosperity, less climate impacts, more shared outcomes. So it sounds like a very important approach to be able to actually facilitate that kind of client conversation and design process.
Yeah. And I think it's about, owning your own future, owning as an individual, but also for leaders, it's owning the future for their business rather than have drifting into it. It's decide where you want to be and think about how you're going to work to it.
So as trained architects, I always like to say that we're kind of hardwired to own the future. And certainly in the in the thousands of years of architectural practice, architects have probably done too much owning of the future and been too top down. However, knowing that we have been trained to think out into the future, to imagine what doesn't exist, how are you seeing everyone in organizations? What is their ability to be able to think future back, to imagine the futures, or even to be future ready?
I think a lot of people are future scared. The metaverse can be scary, or the concept of it. Sounds scary. People are scared about AI, and it's about embracing them, understanding them. I remember in one conversation with Bob, he said about artificial intelligence that maybe it was just named incorrectly. And that had it been described differently in the first place, people would have embraced it more easily. And I think it's about, just not being scared, but understanding, what it means for you.
Right. And I do think that is so important, particularly for belonging. So having that safe space, having that level of trust, being able to have a sense of community and connection that, in many ways people are going to feel a little bit more at ease and less fearful of the future if they're able to kind of hold hands and see that there is an important need for us to move forward collectively, to make some of the changes that we know we all need to make to have an impact on the climate crisis, to be able to address social inequalities and integrate better, and clearly to be more flexible, that agility, which is so important. And Bob, again, as you mentioned, always talks about the importance of being very clear about where we want to go, but very flexible about how we get there. And we refer to that as flexive intent in the book.
Mm-hmm.
And creating that level of confidence that there is a feeling of flexive intent, clarity of where we want to go, flexibility about how we get there, is certainly fundamental to be future ready.
Yeah.
Super. I see there is another question. Wonder if you have come across Neighbourly in the UK, a highly successful organization to creating a win-win culture of the future of collaboration of companies, employees, and communities.
Personally, no. That's a new one to me, but I'm certainly going to go and look it up.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, it's wonderful when we have in the audience that are going to be bringing in signals of this kind of change. So I'm also looking forward to learning more about Neighbourly, and with that, this is a great example of what Office Shock really aims to do. It's aiming to stimulate conversations amongst practitioners, amongst aspiring futurists, and amongst people who are excited about the opportunity to pivot Office Shock into a transition towards more sustainable futures. And sustainability describing really being more sustainable about how we have shared purpose, how we are able to share outcomes, in addition to climate sustainability. But it does go back, as you mentioned earlier, the importance of belonging and how technology will augment our ability to have that shared sense of a future. And clearly, all of that is going to happen somewhere, whether that be face-to-face or, as we're doing now, online, in the metaverse, or in a neighbor cafe or a WeWork or other co-working space, home office as well. As you said earlier, Jill, the Office Verse is really that archipelago of places where, because of technology, but more importantly, because of the importance of collaborating to be able to work together to achieve something that ideally has an impact on making the world a better place. That's what really brings to life the Office Verse in a very meaningful way.
Yeah, I agree entirely with that.
Super. We got time for one last question. Will AI hinder creativity or lead to novel collaboration?
I would go for definitely novel collaboration. So,
Okay.
The AI is taking us somewhere we don't know yet, but the sooner we embrace it and explore really what it can do and look for the benefits of it, I think it's going to be exciting future.
Indeed. And I'll take the AI hinder creativity. I have been actually, within the Institute for the Future, we've actually been experimenting using AI, specifically generative art. And it has the potential to augment creativity. In our chapter on augmentation, there is that spectrum between human and technology, or human and machine. And certainly now with OpenAI, with Imagen from Google, and other generative AI art platforms, it does give the potential for those who have not been trained in a creative discipline to express one's creativity, or at least be able to express one's ideas or intentions in an artistic way. The real meaning is less the product, but more the process. And what we are currently experimenting with is actually getting groups together, starting individually to use an AI art generator, but then to use the prompts from each of the individuals to then converge on a shared image of the future, which ideally has a bit of what the individual's contributions were. So when creating that story of the future, there is ideally some shared meaning in both the illustration and then also the story that goes along with the illustration. In the OfficeShock book, for those of you who have it or have gone online to officeshock.org, you'll see that for each of the 7 spectrums, we actually have illustrations. For each of them, we asked artists to create 6 out of the 7, because again, it's less about the actual product, but it's more the process, and the process that those underrepresented artists went through is a fascinating element of their ability to tell a story of a future with more purpose, or a future with better outcomes or shared outcomes, with less climate impact. But what we are seeing is that AI, the creative potential of AI, may be leading to novel collaboration. But as you said, Jill, very much a work in progress. And it's going to be fascinating to see how this evolves, particularly with some of the recent lawsuits against OpenAI, repurposing images. All of those topics, I'm very excited. We're going to be having a conversation, myself with my co-author, Bob Johansen, with Tom Malone, professor from MIT, who wrote the book Superminds. And that's going to be coming up most likely at the beginning of March. That date is still being defined, but I think that's going to be another great conversation triggered by OfficeShock. Jill, I want to thank you so much for sharing your insights, your foresight, some of the examples of the work that you and BDG are doing. And I look forward to continuing to explore this space of the Office Verse and the intersection of all of the other spectrums. And we're going to be doing that with yourself, 3 other guests, including my co-author, Bob Johansen, Toshi Hu, who is responsible. He's our director at the Institute for the Future of Emerging Technologies, and my good friend, Ibrahim Jackson, who I'm going to be speaking with next week on Belonging. I'm going to bring the 4 of you together at the end of March, on March 27th, for our final OfficeShock talk, to see if the 4 of you can kind of pull all this together in a way that ideally will help either our readers or just anyone interested in turning OfficeShock into a great opportunity for creating better futures for working and living. Wonderful. Jill, thanks so much. And
thank you for having me. Great chat.
Yes, indeed. Take care. Cheers. Bye.
Bye.